The apartment door slammed hard enough to rattle the framed photos hanging near the kitchen. Kevin Carter had just finished tying his shoes when Margarita walked in, dragging a silver suitcase behind her. Her face was flushed with irritation, her blonde hair messy from travel, and her expression already looking for a fight. "I just got back from a business trip," she snapped. "Fine, you didn't come pick me up, but now you're leaving without saying a single word." Kevin slowly stood up from the hallway bench. For a second, he studied her face carefully, trying to understand where the anger was coming from. He had texted her the night before. He had asked what time her flight landed. She never replied. Still, somehow he was the problem. Without waiting for an answer, Margarita threw her coat into his hands. "I had hot pot with everyone last night. The coat smells awful now. Wash it for me." Then she yawned dramatically. "I barely slept. My skin feels dry because I didn't even do my skincare routine." She kicked off her heels carelessly, leaving one near the couch and the other by the door before disappearing toward the bedroom. Kevin looked down at the expensive wool coat in his hands. 3 years ago, he would have immediately apologized. 3 years ago, he would have canceled his plans, made her coffee, and washed the coat before she even asked. But this morning felt different, quietly. He placed the coat on the sofa. "I'm heading out," he said calmly. "Wash it yourself." Margarita stopped halfway down the hallway. The silence that followed felt strange. She turned around slowly, almost confused. "What did you just say?" Kevin grabbed his keys from the counter. "I said I don't have time." Her eyes narrowed instantly. "You've been acting weird lately." Kevin almost laughed at that. Weird, not exhausted. Not emotionally drained. Not tired of constantly being treated like a backup option. Just weird. For months, maybe years, he had ignored things he shouldn't have ignored. Canceled dinners, broken promises, last-minute excuses, her constant prioritizing of Adrian Keller. The friend, the man Kevin had spent years pretending not to worry about because every time he questioned it, Margarita accused him of being insecure. "He's like family. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive." At some point, Kevin stopped arguing because arguing always made him the villain. Margarita crossed her arms. "You know, Adrian picked me up from the airport because you couldn't bother showing up." There it was. Kevin stared at her quietly. Of course, Adrian picked her up. Adrian was always there. The late-night calls, the weekend coffee runs, the inside jokes Kevin never understood. The constant comparisons, even now. She sounded more upset that Kevin failed to compete with Adrian than about anything else. "You should leave before traffic gets worse," Kevin said, for the first time since she walked in. Margarita looked slightly uncertain. Kevin wasn't reacting the way he normally did. No apology. No defending himself. No trying to fix the mood, just distance. And somehow that unsettled her more than a fight ever could. The meeting downtown lasted longer than Kevin expected. By the time he left the office building, the sky over Chicago had already turned gray with evening rain. He loosened his tie while walking toward the parking garage, mentally exhausted, but honestly, the meeting wasn't what occupied his mind. It was Margarita, or maybe Adrian. Kevin leaned against his car for a moment before getting inside. He remembered the first time he met Adrian nearly 2 years ago. Margarita had invited him to dinner with her coworkers. Adrian arrived late, confident and smiling, wearing the kind of effortless charm Kevin immediately distrusted. Margarita lit up the second Adrian walked in. "You finally made it," she had said excitedly. Kevin noticed how naturally she touched Adrian's arm while talking, how she laughed louder at his jokes, how Adrian looked completely comfortable in her space. That night, Kevin asked casually, "So how long have you two known each other?" "Forever," Margarita answered. "He's one of my closest friends." Back then, Kevin tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling sitting in his chest. Over time, that feeling only grew. Adrian somehow became part of everything. If Margarita had a stressful day, she called Adrian. If she wanted restaurant recommendations, she asked Adrian. If she needed help assembling furniture, Adrian showed up before Kevin even heard about it. Kevin once planned a surprise weekend trip for Margarita. She canceled 2 days before because Adrian really needed someone to talk to. Another time, Kevin waited alone at an anniversary dinner reservation for almost an hour. Margarita eventually arrived laughing after helping Adrian deal with some work emergency. She didn't even apologize, instead. She looked annoyed. You know how important he is to me. Every argument ended the same way, Kevin questioning boundaries. Margarita accusing him of jealousy, Kevin apologizing just to restore peace, and little by little he started doubting himself. Maybe he was insecure, maybe he was too sensitive. Maybe modern relationships were just different, but deep down. Something never felt right. His phone buzzed suddenly. Margarita. He stared at the screen before answering. What? Her voice sounded softer than earlier. Are you still mad? Kevin closed his eyes. Briefly mad, it amazed him how she simplified years of disappointment into temporary moods. I'm busy, he replied. There was a pause, then she sighed. Adrian's coming over tonight. We're ordering dinners. You can join us if you want. Kevin laughed quietly under his breath. Of course, she genuinely didn't understand the problem. Or maybe she never cared enough to. I won't be home tonight, he said. Why? Because I don't want to. The line went silent, for the first time in years. Kevin finally heard uncertainty in her voice. Kevin, but he had already ended the call. Kevin spent the evening at his younger sister Emma's apartment. Emma opened the door holding a bowl of popcorn and immediately frowned. You look terrible. Thanks, I mean emotionally. Kevin smiled faintly before sitting down on her couch. Emma had never liked Margarita. Not because Margarita was openly cruel, but because she noticed things Kevin refused to see. She treats you like an employee, Emma once told him, at the time. Kevin defended Margarita for nearly an hour. Now he wished he had listened. Emma handed him a beer. So what happened this time? Kevin hesitated before telling her everything. The airport argument, the codes. Adrian coming over again. Emma shook her head slowly. I'm going to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly. Kevin looked at her. When was the last time you actually felt happy in that relationship? The question hit harder than expected. Kevin opened his mouth but could answer because he honestly didn't know. At some point, loving Margarita became exhausting. Everything revolved around keeping her satisfied. Avoiding conflict, accepting disappointment, pretending not to notice obvious emotional intimacy with another man, and somehow Kevin was always the one apologizing. Emma sat beside him. You've spent years competing with a guy she claims is just a friend. Kevin stared down at the bottle in his hands. The worst part, he admitted quietly. I stopped fighting over it because I thought maybe I was the problem. Emma sighed. That's what happens when someone constantly dismisses your feelings. Kevin leaned back against the couch. Earlier that week, his company offered him a major promotion, regional director, better salary, new opportunities, a fresh start. The only catch was relocation, Seattle. When Kevin first mentioned it to Margarita, her response shocked him. You're not seriously considering leaving, right? I thought we could move together, but my life is here. Kevin remembered asking carefully, would you ever leave for me? Margarita barely looked up from her phone. No, just like that, no hesitation. No thought. That answer stayed with him ever since. Emma watched him quietly. You already know what you need to do, she said. Kevin nodded slowly, for the first time in years. The idea of leaving didn't scare him. It felt peaceful. 2 nights later, Kevin finally returned home. The apartment smelled like expensive candles and pasta sauce. Margarita stood in the kitchen pouring wine into 2 glasses. You're home, she said carefully. Immediately noticed the effort, the clean apartment, the soft music, the calm tone. Margarita only acted this gentle when she felt distance. What's going on? Kevin asked. She forced a smile. I thought we could have dinner together. Kevin placed his bag down slowly. And Adrian? Her expression tightened for half a second. He's not here. Interesting. Kevin sat at the table while Margarita carried over 2 plates of pasta for several minutes. She talked about random things. Work gossip, a new skincare product, vacation ideas. It felt strangely artificial, finally. Kevin interrupted. You seem nervous. Her fork paused. I'm not nervous. You are. Margarita looked at him carefully. You've been distant lately. Kevin almost smiled. Distant, that word again, as if emotional withdrawal appeared out of nowhere instead of growing slowly after years of neglect. You know, Kevin said calmly, I used to think if I tried harder, things would improve. Margarita frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means I kept lowering my standards to keep this relationship alive. Her face hardened instantly. So now I'm a terrible girlfriend. Kevin laughed softly. That's exactly the problem. Every conversation becomes about defending yourself instead of understanding why I'm hurt. Margarita crossed her arms. You're still obsessed with Adrian. No, Kevin replied quietly. Actually, I stopped caring. That answer visibly shook her, because anger she understood, jealousy she understood, competition she understood, indifference. That terrified her. You're overreacting, she said quickly. Kevin shook his head. No. I think I've been underreacting for years. The room fell silent. Then Kevin finally said the thing he'd been thinking about all week. I accepted the Seattle position. Margarita froze. You what? Leaving next month, for the first time since they met. Kevin saw genuine panic in her eyes. What do you mean you're leaving? Margarita asked sharply. Kevin remained calm. I mean exactly what I said. You didn't even discuss this with me. Kevin stared at her in disbelief. Discuss it, he repeated. You already told me you'd never move for me. That's different. How? Margarita opened her mouth, then closed it again. For years, Kevin had watched her argue effortlessly. She always had explanations, always had excuses, always knew how to redirect blame, but tonight felt different. She looked unprepared. You're seriously throwing away our relationship because of your insecurity about Adrian. Kevin leaned back in his chair. No. I'm ending it because I realized I've spent years begging for basic respect. That's dramatic. No, he said firmly. What's dramatic is expecting your partner to constantly tolerate emotional disrespect while pretending everything is normal. Margarita's frustration grew visible. You know, Adrian and I are just friends. Kevin nodded slowly. Maybe. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means the problem stopped being whether you were physically cheating a long time ago. That sentence landed heavily. Between them, Kevin continued quietly. You gave another man emotional priority over your relationship for years. Margarita immediately defended herself. He needed me sometimes, and I needed you. 2. Silence. Kevin looked at her carefully. I can count dozens of moments where I felt alone while being in a relationship, for once. Margarita didn't interrupt. You canceled our anniversary dinner for him. You answered his calls during our vacations. You compared me to him constantly. And every single time I tried to talk about it, you made me feel guilty. Margarita looked away. That wasn't my intention. Kevin nodded. I believe you. She looked surprised. But intentions don't erase consequences. The room became painfully quiet. Then Margarita asked the question he already expected. So what now? Kevin stood up slowly. Now I finally choose myself. For years, he thought love meant patience, sacrifice, understanding, but eventually, he learned something important. Love without mutual respect slowly destroys your self-worth, and he was tired of disappearing inside someone else's priorities. The next few weeks passed. Strangely, Margarita became noticeably different, suddenly. She wanted date nights. She asked Kevin about his day. She started texting him first. At one point, she even suggested they take a weekend trip together. Kevin noticed everything, but he also noticed why it was happening. For years, Margarita felt secure. She believed Kevin would always stay no matter how poorly she handled the relationship. Now that certainty was gone, and suddenly she cared. One evening, Kevin came home to find Adrian sitting in the apartment. Adrian stood up awkwardly. Hey. Man, Kevin nodded politely. Margarita looked tense. We were just talking. Kevin almost found the situation amusing. For years, Adrian acted comfortably in their relationship. Now even he sensed something had changed. Actually heading out, Kevin said. Margarita followed him into the hallway. You're avoiding me. Kevin grabbed his jacket calmly. No. I'm detaching. Her expression fell instantly. You don't mean that, but he did, and deep down. She knew it. What if I fix things? She asked quietly. Kevin looked at her for a long moment. That question would have meant everything to him a year ago. Maybe even 6 months ago. Now it just sounded late. You can improve, he said gently. But relationships shouldn't require someone to reach their breaking point before they start mattering. Margarita's eyes filled with frustration. So you're giving up? Kevin shook his head. No. I gave too much for too long. That night, Kevin drove through downtown Chicago with the windows down despite the cold air, and for the first time in years, his chest felt lighter, painful. But lighter because the hardest part of unhealthy love isn't leaving. It's finally admitting you deserved better the entire time. Rain covered the streets of Seattle the morning Kevin moved into his new apartment. The city felt unfamiliar. Quiet, fresh, exactly what he needed. He spent the afternoon unpacking boxes while jazz music played softly from his speaker. No tension, no arguments. No emotional exhaustion hanging in the air, just peace. A few weeks earlier, Margarita called him 3 nights in a row. The first call was angry, the second emotional. The third almost desperate. "Can we please talk?" she asked during the final call. Kevin listened quietly, then he asked a question she couldn't answer. "Why did it take me leaving for you to finally care?" The silence on the other end said everything. "Because people often ignore your value when they believe you'll never walk away." Kevin eventually wished her well. And this time he meant it, not because he stopped caring overnight, but because holding on to resentment would only keep him emotionally trapped. One evening after work, Kevin sat alone at a small coffee shop overlooking the water. His coworker Daniel joined him with 2 coffees. "So," Daniel asked casually, "do you miss Chicago?" Kevin thought about it honestly. He missed familiar streets. He missed his sister. He missed old routines, but the relationship, no. What he missed was the version of love he kept hoping would eventually exist, and that realization changed everything as the rain tapped softly against the windows. Kevin looked out across the gray Seattle skyline. For years, he believed love meant constantly proving your worth, competing for attention, tolerating emotional neglect. Now he understood something different. Real love doesn't make you feel replaceable. Real love doesn't punish you for expressing hurt. And real love never requires you to shrink yourself just to keep someone beside you. Kevin took a slow sip of coffee and smiled faintly, for the first time in years. He wasn't fighting for someone to choose him. He had finally chosen himself.